Occupied Palestine is mired in tensions as the occupier Israel puts in place restrictions on the religious freedoms of Palestinians by limiting their access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site for Muslims worldwide. With a call from Gaza for this momentum to grow into an intifada, Israeli leaders are heightening their rhetoric, blaming everyone from Muslim leaders to the weak Mahmoud Abbas for apparent incitement. We discuss that and a lot more in this edition of the debate. Let me now introduce our guests for this edition of the debate. We're joined by Ms. Hafsa Kara Mustafa, who is a journalist and political analyst who is joining us live from London. And we're also joined by Ms. Maxine Dover, who is a journalist and political commentator who is joining us live from New York. Thank you both for joining us for this edition of the debate. Mr. Dover, I'd like to start with you. France, among others, has stated that these tensions that we're seeing play out do not come as a surprise to it. When even allies of Israel admit that its occupation and aggression is only making things worse, what does that say?
The trauma and the tragedy that's going on throughout this area is one that needs to be stopped, and needs to be stopped by good leadership, by positive response of leadership to stopping the violence. The violence is not one-sided. At this point, the response to the violence has made it a double-sided violence. The only result that's going to be is that more people will die, more people will be hurt. What do I say? The only hope that one can have is that this violence be stopped and that active negotiations, sincere negotiations, be back underway, or be underway for the first time.
Okay, Ms. Kara Mustafa, I put the same question to you. And as Ms. Dover there said, we need good leadership and we need this double-sided violence, in her words, to end.
Well, yes, but I also note that she avoided the question, which was in relation to what does it say about Israel, that even its own friends are recognizing that its actions are actually fueling these crimes. I think there is no two sides to this situation. We're seeing settlers, Jewish extremist settlers, actually attacking Palestinians day in, day out. And now what we've seen in the past few days is Palestinians reacting to this violence that was ignited by the Jewish extremist settlers. So I don't think it's a two-sided situation. It's a situation where the occupying forces, who are already in violation of UN international law, who are already occupying and subjugating the Palestinian population, are starting to face a reaction from the population that they're oppressing. But of course, it's not a two-sided equal conflict. It is, and it has to be reinstated constantly, that there is an occupying force and there is an occupied people, and the occupied people are slowly starting to react. But of course, the level of violence is overwhelmingly on the side of Israel.
Very well, Ms. Dover, I wanted to put that point to you because, you know, Ms. Kara Mustafa, I'm glad she brought that up. Some of the root causes of why we're seeing what we're seeing happening across the occupied territories. Another thing I wanted to throw out there and ask you about is also this issue of religious freedoms. You know, whenever there are tensions in the occupied territories, the first right that Israel takes away is the right of religious freedom, the right to worship at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. In what Israel calls itself a democracy, why would you do that?
I think the right to worship and the right to worship on the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the area that is considered the holiest place in the Jewish religion should not be limited. But what needs to be limited is the use of such religious sites as staging places for violence. When it is reported that Muslim, Arab, Palestinians who should be coming to worship are instead coming and wearing shoes within the mosque, which I, as a non-Muslim, would never do, as a matter of respect. But when they are coming and gathering stones in the mosque, that becomes a place of violence, not of peace, as Islam would have it be, not a place of refuge from the traumas of the world, where peace and prayer should be the pattern, not gathering rocks to throw stones. And when the violence is incited within a religious area, that is a very large question. How do you stop those who would limit the rights of all others who in fact do come to worship?
Okay, let me put that point to Ms. Kara Mustafa. What do you think about that?
I think this, the responses here that we're having from Mr. Ver and many of Israel's apologists really is indicative of the desperation, because they really are lacking arguments. When you come out with a story that some Muslims are going into a mosque with shoes and they're somehow trying to ignite violence from within the mosque, I think it really shows the desperation. What we've seen in the past few weeks, but not just in the past few weeks, over the past year, over the past 10 years, in fact, indeed over the past 60 years, we've seen Israelis constantly attacking, constantly murdering Palestinians, and every time they've reacted, as you mentioned, they come out and actually stop Muslim worshippers in particular from accessing the holiest, one of the holiest sites in Islam for them. So I don't quite see what Mr. Ver is attempting to say, and rather trying to divert from the information this week, which is the Jewish extremist settlers are actually constantly attacking Palestinians. Palestinians have started to react. Now, what we've seen in recent weeks, we've seen that Israeli Jewish extremists actually stand outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque and provoke Palestinians every Friday when they attempt to reach their place of worship. Had it been the other way around, or actually Palestinians were standing by the Wailing Wall and heckling Jewish worshippers, I don't think Ms. Dover would be so respectful of the attitude of the Palestinians doing that. I really can't see how she can turn this situation and make the Palestinians, who are victims of Israeli crimes, seem as the actual culprits. It's the Israelis who are attacking the Palestinians. It's the Israelis who are occupying the Palestinians. It's not the other way around.
Mr. Rivera, what do you think of that? Because, you know, Ms. Kara Mustafa honed in on one thing which I wanted to ask you, which is provocation. Go ahead.
I beg to differ about who is attacking who. It's the extremists on both sides who are attacking the other side, and those who are attacked are not necessarily the extremists. Those who are attacked are not necessarily the provocateurs. When you have a 22-year-old young man walking with his wife and baby, and he ends up dead, and the person who comes to try and help him ends up dead, then you have an attack. That is an attack on a worshiper who is not going with stones, not going with arms, but rather was going to worship. And he ended up dead. There is a need for respect that doesn't exist at this point, because those who would cause trauma, those who would cause terror, those who would kill, are using religion, and they're not using it for religious purposes. They're using it for terrorist, political purposes. Religion has, in history, been used by negative leaders for political purposes. We in the 21st century should be a little bit more aware, and we should have the ability of the imam of a mosque and the rabbi of a synagogue to sit and, because those two leaders and people in that leadership position should understand what is the value and what is the purpose of religion, and lead their followers away from violence. And the idea that one is more responsible than the other, who is killing who first? And nobody is able to decide where the base is, and it's time to say we are now at ground zero. Let's go forward with peace and with goodness. And there are problems that need to be settled, that without question. We all know that. That isn't anything new. But unless we have responsible leaders who don't incite on either side, who don't use podiums in the international body to incite, this is going to get worse rather than better.
Okay, I just want to take a quick time out. I do apologize for interrupting, Ms. Dover. I just wanted to take a quick time out because our viewers obviously have been taking part in this conversation as well through our various social media presence. Let's listen to some of those comments as they've posted on our social media pages, and we'll be right back.
When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Brief answer to those who question the resistance of Palestine. The root cause of the problems in the Middle East is disunity among the Muslim Ummah. please stop killing Palestinians. Palestinians were the only problem. This has to end. Please, Israelis, take serious action against those terrorists, and like always, defend and protect your citizens. Israel keeps getting away with everything. Like a naughty child, Israel is now out of control. The West and Israel disregard Palestinian rights. The world knows about the illegal settlers and what they're doing. How does the Muslim world view the Palestinians? I strongly condemn all terror and violence acts wherever they may happen, and whoever does it. USA and UK governments are responsible and must pay for what's their fault. They formed an illegal state in the Middle East, which is Israel on Palestinian land.
I want to go to Ms. Cara Mustafa now to get a reaction from what Mr. Dovere was saying before we went to those comments. Ms. Cara Mustafa, I'm wondering, what Mr. Dovere there said has been echoed by Netanyahu too. He's blamed Muslim leaders for incitement. How do you feel about that?
Well, one point I would have to agree with when Mr. Dovere actually says that religion is used by evil people. I would have to agree that the very original Zionists used Judaism to create a very racist, bigoted, extremist, supremacist ideology. And the result is what we're seeing today in Israel, which is people who feel that somehow they are superior to the Palestinians, to the Muslims, and therefore their lives have more value. On a day when we have seen footage of a woman, a mother of 3, standing in a bus stop, raising her hands, being surrounded by 5 fully armed policemen and gunned down like a wild animal, I really can't say that there is two bad sides to this story. Once again, it is the occupying force that is committing crimes against the occupied people. The occupied people are merely reacting. I really think that we can sort of debate this ad nauseum, but the reality of the situation is this: there wouldn't be any Palestinian reaction had there not been any Israeli illegal occupation. And I think that when you look at the fact that the Israeli population continues to vote for the most extreme right-wing politicians, I think it's really an indication of how far the Zionist ideology has spread and is very infiltrating the mentality of the Israelis, whereby they seem to view Palestinian life as unworthy. And basically what the Israelis are looking at Palestinians as merely Untermensch. I think it's utterly shameful, and there's absolutely no justification for what's happening. There are no two sides once again to this situation. There is an occupied people facing occupation.
Mr. Dovere, speaking about politicians in Israel, I found this interesting today, and I wanted to put this to you. After the stabbing of 2 Bedouins and 2 Palestinians by an Israeli, Dimona's mayor told Israel's Channel 10, and I'm quoting him now, that the stabber was a, quote, mentally ill man, end quote. I find that interesting because he's basically trying to cover up and make it okay that this Israeli stabbed 2 Bedouins and 2 Palestinians. Is that indicative of the psyche in Israeli society, do you think?
No, I don't think that we are in a position to comment on the mental state of someone described as mentally ill. When a stabber stabs, there is a kind of an adrenaline that has to be driving him, whether it's a 15-year-old or a mentally ill, whatever age this person was. Was this person mentally ill? I suspect he is someone who is reacting to the anger he must be feeling around him and acted without the limitations that civilized society would put on someone. I can't comment on this person, but as far as covering up, I don't think Israel is covering up. There are certainly Israelis who would agree with the attempt to respond, and this